The antiseptic scent of the ward was a poor mask for the underlying notes of fear and stale coffee. It was a smell Anya Sharma knew better than her own name, or at least the name she used now, Nurse Sharma. She adjusted the drape on Corporal Davis's bed, her movements economical, precise. A slight, almost imperceptible drag in her left leg marked her passage between the beds, a ghost of a limp, a souvenir from another life. "Easy there, Florence Nightingale," the corporal grunted, his voice a gravelly mix of pain and bravado. He was young, barely 22, with the chest of a bull and the defiant eyes of a man who thought he was invincible until a piece of Kandahar proved him wrong. Shrapnel. Close to the spine. They said he was lucky. Anya knew luck had little to do with it. She checked the drip rate on his IV. Morphine. Not enough to dull the edges of his pride. "You handle those things like you're afraid to break 'em," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. She didn't respond. She just made a small adjustment, ensuring the line was clear. "Bet you never had to deal with anything rougher than a paper cut in nursing school." His gaze dropped to her leg as she turned. The limp. "Trip over a curb on your way to a protest?" he sneered. He laughed loud enough for the whole ward to hear. It was a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the sterile tiles. Anya felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the cold memory that lived in the damaged nerves of her thigh. She said nothing. Her silence only seemed to fuel him. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you just don't have an answer. Never seen a real day of hardship in your life, have you, sweetheart?" From across the nurse's station, Dr. Mark Cross looked up, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. He considered Anya competent, but soft. Timid. He'd seen her flinch at loud noises, had noted her tendency to fade into the background. This little scene only confirmed his assessment. Anya met the corporal's gaze. Her own eyes, a deep, quiet gray, held no anger, only a profound, ancient weariness. She was about to speak, to offer some placating, empty phrase, when the doors to the ward hissed open. 4 men walked in. They were not doctors. They were not visitors. They wore civilian clothes, jeans, worn jackets, boots, but they moved with a coiled, predatory grace that did not belong in a hospital. It was in their posture, the constant fluid scan of their eyes, the way they occupied space as if they owned it. They moved together, a single, silent organism. The ward seemed to shrink around them. Nurses paused mid-chart. The low hum of conversation died. Even Dr. Cross, a man whose ego filled every room he entered, straightened up, an unconscious flicker of apprehension on his face. The men swept the room with their eyes. Their search was brief. It ended on her, on Nurse Sharma, standing beside the bed of the mocking corporal. The lead man, tall with a face carved from granite and a beard that looked like it had been through a war, broke from the group. He walked towards her. His steps were silent, measured. The other 3 fanned out, creating a subtle, unspoken perimeter. They weren't blocking anyone, not explicitly, but no one was moving. Corporal Davis's laughter had long since died in his throat. He watched the approaching man, his eyes wide, a dawning realization chasing the arrogance from his face. He recognized the look, the walk, the utter lack of wasted motion. That was not a civilian. That was a hunter. The man stopped a respectful 2 feet from Anya. He didn't look at her limp. He looked at her face. His own hard features softened with something that looked like reverence. "Major," he said. His voice was a low rumble, but it carried across the silent ward like a thunderclap. Not a question, a statement, a title, an acknowledgement. Anya's composure, the placid mask of Nurse Sharma, finally cracked. A flicker of the past, of dust and blood and screaming, crossed her face. "Ghost," she breathed, the name an old reflex. The man, Ghost, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "It's good to see you, ma'am." Behind him, the other 3 men stood straighter. They weren't looking at Ghost. They were all looking at her, at their major. In Corporal Davis's bed, the color drained from his face. He stared at the quiet nurse, at the slight woman with the tired eyes, and the limp he had just mocked. Major. The word hung in the air, heavy and impossible. He looked from her to the operators, these quiet, dangerous men who deferred to her with a single word. His expression told the whole story. The sneer was gone, replaced by a mixture of shock, horror, and a sudden, dawning shame that was more painful than the shrapnel in his back. Her old team heard his laughter, and now, in the ringing silence, they were all waiting for her response. Suddenly, the monitors beside Davis's bed erupted in a cacophony of alarms. Red lights flashed. A high-pitched, insistent beep cut through the stunned quiet. "BP is bottoming out! Heart rate is spiking!" a floor nurse yelled, jolting into action. Dr. Cross rushed over, pushing past one of the operators, who moved aside with fluid economy. "What's happening?" Cross demanded, his eyes fixed on the frantic lines of the EKG. "Tachycardia, severe hypotension. He's going into shock." Corporal Davis gasped, his eyes rolling back. "He's bleeding out internally," Anya said. Her voice had changed. The quiet, timid tone of Nurse Sharma was gone. In its place was a voice of absolute, cold command. It cut through the rising panic like a scalpel. Cross shot her an irritated look. "I didn't ask for your input, Sharma. Get me a crash cart and prep a saline bolus." "It won't be enough," Anya stated, her eyes scanning the monitor with an intensity that made the digital readout seem slow. "The initial scan must have missed something. A migrating fragment from the blast." "That's ridiculous," Cross snapped. "The CT was clear. He's stable." "He was stable," she corrected, stepping towards the bed. "Now he has a massive retroperitoneal bleed. That shrapnel wasn't stationary. The blast wave created micro-fissures in the surrounding tissue. Any slight movement, a cough, sitting up too fast, it could have shifted it." She was no longer looking at him. She was looking at the patient. At her patient. Ghost stepped forward. "Major?" "He's got maybe 3 minutes before he arrests from cardiac tamponade," Anya said, her hands already moving, tearing open Davis's gown. "The fragment has likely nicked the descending aorta or one of the renal arteries. We don't have time to get him to an OR." Dr. Cross stared at her, dumbfounded. "Tamponade? We're not even in the chest cavity. And we are not cracking him open in the middle of the ward. That is insane." Anya turned her head, and for the first time, Dr. Mark Cross saw who he was truly dealing with. The weariness in her eyes was gone, replaced by a fire so intense it was like looking into the heart of a forge. "In your world, it's insane," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "In mine, it's Tuesday." She looked at Ghost. "I need a kit." It wasn't a request. Ghost didn't hesitate. He turned to one of his men. "Reaper, the bag. Now." Reaper was already moving, shrugging off a worn black backpack and placing it on a nearby cart. He unzipped it with a single, swift motion. Inside was not the usual collection of personal items. It was a meticulously organized trauma kit, filled with military-grade surgical equipment that made the hospital's crash cart look like a child's toy. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Cross sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. "You are a nurse. If you so much as touch him, I'll have your license and you'll be charged with assault." Anya ignored him. She pulled a pair of sterile gloves from the kit, her movements a blur of efficiency. "Ghost, I need pressure on the femoral artery, both sides. Hard." "On it, Major." "Preacher, get his head. Keep the airway clear." "Yes, ma'am." Her team moved without question, their actions seamless, a testament to years spent in the crucible of combat. They became an extension of her will. Dr. Cross stood frozen, watching this woman he thought he knew transform into a field commander. Her squad of quiet professionals turning a sterile hospital ward into a forward operating base. "Security!" Cross finally bellowed, finding his voice. "Get security in here now." The fourth operator, a man with cold, watchful eyes, simply turned to face the door. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The message was clear. No one was coming in. Anya pulled a chest tube, a scalpel, and a set of rib spreaders from the kit. What would you have done in Dr. Richardson's position? Share your thoughts in the comments. A voice from a world away seemed to whisper in the back of my mind, a strange echo of a life I could barely remember. But there was no time for that. There was only the patient. I had to focus. The patient. Corporal Davis was fading. His life was measured in the frantic beeps of the monitor. "I'm not going to let you butcher this man based on some battlefield hunch," Cross shouted, stepping between her and the bed. Anya didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She met his eyes, and the sheer, unyielding force of her will was a physical blow. "He has seconds, Doctor. You can either help me save him, or you can watch him die while you quote protocol. Your choice." She held his gaze for a heartbeat. In that moment, he saw it all. The authority she wore not like a costume, but like a second skin. The certainty that came from seeing death up close, over and over, and spitting in its face. He saw, with sickening clarity, how wrong he had been. He stepped back. Anya turned back to the patient. "Scalpel." Reaper slapped it into her gloved hand. "This is an emergency thoracotomy," she announced to the stunned nurses who had gathered around, their fear warring with their professional curiosity. "We're opening the chest to get direct access to the heart and aorta. We need to clamp the aorta to stop the bleed, relieve the pressure around the heart, and then, if we are very, very lucky, find the source." She made the first incision, a long, clean cut between the fourth and fifth ribs. There was no hesitation. Her hand was rock steady. The room was silent save for the beeping of the monitor and her calm, steady instructions. "Rib spreaders." Ghost placed them. Anya cranked them open, exposing the thoracic cavity. It was a brutal, visceral sight. A young floor nurse gagged and turned away. Cross watched, his face a mask of disbelief. He had performed this procedure dozens of times, but always in the sterile, controlled environment of an operating room, with a full team, anesthesiology, and hours of prep. She was doing it in a ward, with a backpack full of gear, in under 30 seconds. "Heart is compressed," Anya noted, her fingers probing gently inside the chest cavity. "Pericardium is full of blood. That's the tamponade. The pressure is preventing the heart from beating properly." She took the scalpel again and made a small, precise nick in the pericardial sac. A gush of dark, venous blood spilled out, pooling on the floor. The effect was instantaneous. The frantic beeping of the heart monitor slowed, the rhythm becoming more regular. "Pressure is stabilizing," a nurse read out, her voice filled with awe. "That bought us a minute," Anya said, not looking up. "Now for the hard part." Her hand disappeared deep into the corporal's chest. The remaining nurses and Dr. Cross leaned in, mesmerized. Her touch was impossibly delicate. She wasn't just a surgeon. She was a watchmaker, working on the most intricate mechanism in the universe. "I'm palpating the descending aorta," she narrated, her voice a calm anchor in the storm. "There's a tear. Small, but catastrophic under pressure. The fragment must have grazed it when it shifted." "How can you possibly?" Cross started, but trailed off. He knew the answer. Practice. Horrific, bloody, desperate practice. "Need a vascular clamp," she said. Reaper had it ready. She took it, and with a dexterity that seemed impossible, guided it deep into the chest cavity, using only her sense of touch. There was a soft click. "Aorta is clamped," she confirmed. "The bleeding has stopped." She looked at the anesthesiologist who had arrived with the crash cart and was now just staring. "He needs blood. All of it. Activate the massive transfusion protocol. O negative until we can get a type and cross." The doctor, a senior physician, simply nodded and began shouting orders, galvanized by her command. Anya held her position, one hand still inside the soldier's chest, the other steadying the clamp. The ward, which had been a scene of chaos moments before, was now a model of efficiency, all centered around the quiet nurse with the limp. She had not just taken control of the patient, she had taken control of the entire room. For 5 long minutes, she stood there, a human pillar holding back death. Finally, a gurney crashed through the doors, pushed by a surgical team. "We're ready in OR3, the lead surgeon yelled. Anya nodded. "Good. We move on my count. Ghost, you're on the clamp. Do not move. Do not let the pressure change. Reaper, Preacher, you have the gurney. Smoothly. No jostling." They transferred the patient, a ballet of precise movements. As they began to rush him towards the operating room, Anya finally pulled her hand away. She stood there for a moment, covered in Corporal Davis's blood, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion in its wake. The ward was a mess of blood and discarded packaging. In the middle of it all stood Dr. Cross. He looked at the blood on the floor, then at Anya. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he found the words. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a profound, shaken respect. Anya looked down at her bloody gloves. "My name is Dr. Anya Sharma," she said, her voice quiet again, the fire in her eyes banking to embers. "I was a major in the United States Army, Special Operations Command, trauma surgeon attached to Task Force 11. She peeled off the gloves and dropped them into a biohazard bin. "Now," she said, looking at him with those tired, old eyes, "I'm just a nurse." She turned and walked away, her limp more pronounced than ever. Dr. Cross did not apologize, not then. An apology felt too small, too insignificant for the chasm of his misjudgment. He just watched her go, the title echoing in his mind. Major. 4 hours later, Corporal Davis was stable in the ICU. The surgical team in the OR had simply had to repair the damage Anya had already controlled. The chief of surgery, after hearing the story, called it a 1 in a million save. A miracle. Cross knew it wasn't a miracle. It was a skill honed in places he could not imagine. He found Anya in a small, deserted supply closet on the 3rd floor. She was sitting on an overturned bucket, her head in her hands. Her team stood sentry outside the closed door, their presence a silent, unbreachable wall. Cross hesitated, then addressed the man called Ghost. "I need to speak with her." Ghost looked at him, his expression unreadable. "The Major is resting." "Please," Cross said. The word felt foreign on his tongue. He had not pleaded for anything in decades. Ghost considered him for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. He opened the door. Anya looked up as Cross entered. The room was small, smelling of bleach and sterile gauze. "The boy," she said. "Davis. How is he?" "He'll live," Cross replied, his voice rough. "He'll walk again. Because of you." She nodded, a wave of relief washing over her face. "You performed an emergency resuscitative thoracotomy with aortic cross-clamping in a non-sterile environment with a field kit," Cross said, as if reciting the facts would make them real. "You diagnosed a migrating blast fragment that a 64-slice CT scanner missed. You saved his life." "It's what I was trained to do," she said simply. "No," Cross countered, shaking his head. "I've seen military surgeons. Good ones. I've never seen anything like that. That wasn't just training. That was artistry." He finally met her eyes. "I was wrong," he said. "What I said, how I treated you, I am sorry." It was more than an apology. It was a confession. Anya gave a small, tired smile. "You had no way of knowing, Doctor." "But that's the question, isn't it?" he pressed, taking a step closer. "Why? Why doesn't anyone know? A surgeon with your skill. You could be head of trauma at any top-tier hospital in the world. Hopkins, Mayo. They'd build a department around you. So why are you here, working as a nurse, hiding that talent?" The question hung in the small room. Anya's gaze drifted to the floor. Her hand instinctively went to her left thigh, where the deep, scarring tissue pulled beneath her scrubs. "Because the last time I was in charge," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I lost one of my own." The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Cross saw the pain that flashed in her eyes, a raw, unhealed wound. It was a black site in the Helmand province. Ghost's voice came from the doorway. He had stepped inside, his presence filling the space. "We were on a recovery mission. High-value target. Intel was bad." Anya didn't look up. She just continued to stare at the floor, lost in the memory. "We walked into a complex ambush," Ghost continued, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "IEDs, RPGs, layered machine gun fire. It was a kill box." He looked at Cross. "We had multiple casualties within seconds. One of our guys, a young medic named Martinez, went down hard. Femoral artery was severed. The major, Dr. Sharma, she ran into the kill zone to get to him. Didn't hesitate." Cross looked at Anya's leg. The limp. "She took 2 rounds to the thigh on her way to him," Ghost said, confirming the unspoken thought. "Didn't stop her. She got to Martinez, got a tourniquet on him, and started working, all while rounds were kicking up dust around them." He paused, the memory seeming to thicken the air. "She kept him alive for 20 minutes under direct fire. 20 minutes. Doing things with a field kit that surgeons in a hospital would call impossible. But the bird couldn't land. The firefight was too intense." Anya flinched, a barely perceptible tremor. "Our commanding officer, a Colonel Reed, was circling overhead," Ghost said, and now a sliver of cold anger entered his voice. "He had a choice. Risk the helicopter to extract us and the wounded, or protect the asset he had on board. A local warlord we were cutting a deal with." Cross felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He knew where this was going. "Reed made the call," Ghost said. "He aborted the landing. He left us there." "He left us to die," Anya whispered, the words ragged. "He declared Martinez KIA over the radio, while I still had my hands on his heart, trying to keep it beating." She finally looked up, and her eyes were hollow. "I couldn't hold him. The blood loss. He arrested. I did everything I could, but he died in my arms." Reed's official report stated that Martinez was killed instantly. It said my reckless attempt to save him endangered the rest of the team. The story settled in the room, ugly and suffocating. "He buried us," Ghost said. "Blamed the major for a failure of combat triage discipline. She was awarded a Medal for Valor in a closed-door ceremony and given an honorable discharge with a gag order. They erased her. They made her a ghost. So I became one," Anya finished. "I couldn't be a surgeon anymore. I couldn't hold that responsibility. Not after Martinez. I thought if I was just a nurse, just following orders, I couldn't make the wrong call. I couldn't fail anyone again." Cross was speechless. He had built his career on protocols, on a system designed to mitigate risk and assign blame. Her story came from a world where the only protocol was survival, and the only blame that mattered was the one you carried yourself. That wasn't a failure, he said, his voice thick with emotion. What you did for that boy today, what you did for Martinez, that was heroism. Tell that to his family, she shot back, the pain sharp and fresh. Before anyone could respond, a nurse poked her head into the supply closet, her face pale. Dr. Cross, Dr. Sharma, there are some men here to see you. Cross frowned. What men? They're from the Department of Defense, she stammered, and they're with him. She pointed down the hall. Walking towards them, flanked by two stern-faced men in dark suits, was a man in a crisp, decorated army uniform. He was tall, silver-haired, with cold, calculating eyes. Anya froze. The color drained from her face. Ghost and his team instinctively moved to stand in front of her, forming a human shield. Reed, Ghost growled, the name a curse. Colonel Reed stopped a few feet away, his polished shoes gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His eyes swept over Ghost and his men with casual dismissal. They landed on Anya. Major Sharma, he said, his voice smooth and reptilian. It's been a long time. I see you've been keeping busy. His gaze flickered to the doors of the ICU, where Corporal Davis was sleeping under watch. An unregistered, unsanctioned emergency thoracotomy, Reed continued, a thin smile on his lips. Word travels fast when someone performs a procedure that's only taught in certain specialized programs. It flagged a database I monitor. Imagine my surprise. What do you want, Reed? Anya asked, her voice trembling slightly, but her eyes holding his. I heard about your little miracle, he said, ignoring her question. Impressive. Always were a dab hand with a scalpel. A shame to see such talent wasted changing bedpans. I asked you what you want, she repeated, her voice firmer now. Reed's smile faded. You broke your NDA, Major, spectacularly. Performing a classified surgical technique in front of a dozen civilian witnesses. That's a problem. For you, and for me. You left us to die, Ghost bit out, taking a threatening step forward. One of the suits put a hand on the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. Stand down, Master Sergeant, Reed said calmly. You're out of your jurisdiction, as is she. He looked back at Anya. You've put me in a difficult position. I can't have you out in the world. A loose end. A walking, talking reminder of a mission that, officially, never happened. So you're here to silence me? Anya challenged, her chin lifting. Reed chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Don't be so dramatic. I'm not a villain in a movie. I'm a pragmatist. I'm here to offer you a choice. He gestured to the hospital around them. You can face a court-martial for violating the National Security Act, not to mention the mountain of civilian malpractice suits this hospital will be buried under. You'll be stripped of your license, your reputation, your freedom. You'll go to prison, and you'll never touch a patient again. He let that sink in. Or, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, you can come back. I'm running a new program, off books, a medical rapid response unit for sensitive situations. We need a lead surgeon, someone with your unique, field-proven skills. Your record will be wiped clean. You'll have unlimited resources, a chance to do what you were born to do, on your own terms. He paused, his eyes gleaming. But you'll belong to me. It was a brilliant, cruel trap. He was offering her the one thing she craved, purpose, a chance to use her skills to save lives, but at the cost of her soul. She would be his ghost again, but this time, willingly. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? The strange thought flickered again, a ghost of a voice from a life that felt 1,000,000 miles away. I had to choose, here, now. Run again, or stay and fight. Anya looked at Ghost, at Reaper and Preacher, the men who had stood by her. She looked at Dr. Cross, who now watched Reed with open contempt, and she thought of Corporal Davis, sleeping peacefully in the ICU, a young man with a future she had given him. She had spent years running from the ghost of Martinez, believing she was a failure. But Reed's arrival, his offer, it reframed everything. He didn't want her because she was a failure. He wanted her because she was dangerous. He wanted her because she was the best, and he needed to control her. The shame she had carried for so long began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning, righteous anger. He hadn't just left Martinez to die. He had stolen her life. He had made her believe she was broken. "What if there's a third option?" she asked, her voice ringing with a newfound strength in the narrow hallway. Reed raised an eyebrow. "I'm not a fan of third options." "The option where you turn around and walk out of this hospital," she said, "and you never speak to me again." Reed laughed. "And what army is going to make me do that, Major?" "She's not a major anymore," a new voice said. Dr. Cross stepped forward, positioning himself squarely between Reed and Anya. "She is Dr. Anya Sharma, and as of 10 minutes ago, she is the new director of trauma surgery for this hospital." Anya stared at him, stunned. Ghost and his men exchanged surprised glances. Reed's expression soured. "Don't be a fool. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "On the contrary," Cross said, his voice dripping with ice, "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. You're a bureaucrat, a parasite who sends real soldiers to die and then hides behind classified documents. And she," he said, gesturing back to Anya without taking his eyes off Reed, "is the finest surgeon I have ever seen." He straightened his tie. "So let me be perfectly clear, Colonel. Any attempt to intimidate, harass, or prosecute Dr. Sharma will be met with the full legal and public relations might of this institution. I will personally contact every news outlet from here to Washington. We'll talk about your classified missions. We'll talk about a decorated war hero being hounded by the very government she served. I imagine that would be a problem. For you." Reed's face was a thundercloud. He had expected a broken soldier, an easy pawn to manipulate. He had not expected a civilian doctor with a spine of steel and the backing of a major medical center. He had miscalculated. "You're making a grave mistake," Reed hissed. "No," Cross replied calmly. "I'm correcting one. Now get out of my hospital." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. The air crackled with hostility. Reed stared at Cross, then at Anya, who stood tall, her fear gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. He saw he had lost. His power was in the shadows, in secrets and intimidation. Here, in the light, under the unflinching gaze of these people, he had none. Without another word, he turned on his heel and strode away, his suited lackeys trailing in his wake. The hallway was silent for a moment after they left. Then Anya turned to Cross, her expression a mixture of shock and gratitude. "Director of trauma surgery?" she asked, a small, incredulous smile on her face. Cross allowed himself a thin smile in return. "I had to improvise. But the offer is real. The board will approve it. Hell, I'll make them approve it. We're creating the position for you." He grew serious again. "Anya, what you have, it doesn't belong in the shadows. It belongs here, saving lives." She looked at her old team. Ghost gave her a slow, proud nod. "It's time, Major. Time to come home." But he didn't mean the army. He meant coming home to herself. Tears welled in Anya's eyes, the first she had allowed herself to shed in years. They weren't tears of sorrow or of pain. They were tears of release. The ghost of Martinez, the weight of Reed's betrayal, the years of hiding. It all began to lift. She took a deep breath. "Okay," she said. It was a simple word, but it held the weight of her entire future. 6 months later, the doors to the newly christened Sharma Center for Advanced Trauma and Veteran Care hissed open. Dr. Anya Sharma stood in the central hub, not as a ghost, but as its director. She wore crisp blue surgical scrubs and a white lab coat with her name and new title stitched over the heart. She still had the limp, but now she no longer saw it as a mark of failure. It was a reminder of the cost and of the strength it took to pay it. Dr. Cross stood beside her, looking at the bustling activity of the state-of-the-art facility. "You built this," he said, a note of awe in his voice. "We built this," she corrected. Her old team was there, too. They were her new staff. Ghost was the center's administrator, his logistical genius now used to coordinate patient care instead of troop movements. Reaper and Preacher were training paramedics and new doctors in combat life-saving techniques, bridging the gap between military and civilian medicine. An alarm sounded from one of the trauma bays. "Multiple GSWs inbound by chopper, 5 minutes out," a nurse called. Anya's demeanor shifted. The calm administrator vanished, and the surgeon took her place. The fire was back in her eyes, bright and clear. "Let's go to work," she said, her voice ringing with purpose. She turned and walked towards the trauma bay, not hiding her limp, but embracing it. It was a part of her story, a story she was no longer afraid to tell. She was no longer running from her past, but empowered by it, using the very skills forged in the darkest of places to bring light and healing to others. She was Dr. Anya Sharma, and she was finally home. The journey from the shadows was long, and the scars, both visible and not, were a testament to the battles fought. But standing there, under the bright, sterile lights of a place built on redemption, I knew my war was finally over. A new one, a war against death itself, was just beginning. And for the first time in a very long time, I was ready for the fight. My past was not a weight, but a foundation. And upon that foundation, we would build miracles.